Dexter Williams, a ruthless drug lord who showed not a shred of remorse during his trial, or Deobra Redden, who literally flew at the judge's neck when she was about to sentence him to prison, are some absurd examples of trials that spiraled completely out of control. Perhaps one of the most shocking is that of Luis Bracamontes, a completely deranged drug trafficker who, in addition to making serious threats, insulted the families of his victims right in the courtroom, leaving the judges trying to sentence him literally shaking. Luis Bracamontes, born in Mexico on June 8, 1970, spent much of his life in the world of crime. Initially involved in the trafficking of illicit substances, he soon became a well-known name among authorities and criminals in various regions of the United States. For years, his ability to evade deportations and build distribution networks turned him into a key figure in the supply of illegal substances in states such as Arizona and California. In the late 1990s, he faced his first convictions, being deported at least twice after charges of possessing illicit substances for sale. Even so, Bracamontes repeatedly returned to the United States, broadening his influence. He was not just a local-level trafficker. Reports indicate that he was part of a transnational network connected to suppliers in Mexico. The date of October 24, 2014 became marked as one of the most violent days in Sacramento's recent history. Bracamontes, then using the false name Marcelo Marquez, began a crime spree that started with the murder of Officer Danny Oliver in a motel parking lot. Armed and accompanied by his wife Janelle Monroy, he set off on a chase that resulted in 2 more attacks, multiple stolen vehicles, and the killing of another officer, Detective Michael Davis, in the Auburn area. In addition to the 2 officers who were killed, other people were also injured, including a civilian who was shot during the pursuit. The manhunt for Bracamontes mobilized law enforcement from across the region until he was captured after hours of panic. Luis Bracamontes' trial was one of the longest and most tumultuous on record. During the 4 years between his arrest and his sentencing, he turned the courtroom into a stage for provocations, insults, and a total lack of regard for the justice system. Bracamontes frequently interrupted testimonies with laughter and sarcastic comments. While a wounded officer was testifying, he made threatening gestures and shouted insults. When the victims' families spoke of their pain, he smiled and at one point even applauded sarcastically. He declared several times, loudly and clearly, that he would do it all again, underscoring his pride in the acts he had committed.
I will break out soon and I will kill more.
On one occasion, as Danny Oliver's mother described the devastating impact of losing her son, he rolled his eyes, rocked in his chair, and laughed as she spoke. This behavior caused him to be removed from the courtroom multiple times. Yet he persisted in interrupting from the holding room, shouting insults that could be heard in the courtroom. His conduct was so shocking that many in attendance felt it prolonged the trauma he had already inflicted. He not only mocked the victims and their families, but also threatened the judge and defense attorneys, refusing to cooperate at any point in the proceedings. After months of testimony and evidence, the jury had no doubt about Bracamontes' guilt. In February 2018, he was found guilty of the murders of Oliver and Davis, as well as other charges that included attempted murder and illegal firearm possession. In March of that same year, the jury recommended the death penalty, which the judge soon confirmed. On the day of sentencing, Bracamontes maintained his disrespectful demeanor. When the verdict was read, he smiled and hurled insults at those present. The judge, visibly frustrated, emphasized that the sentence was an unavoidable outcome for someone who had shown utter disregard for human life. Even though the death penalty was handed down in 2018, Bracamontes remains on death row awaiting execution due to the lengthy appeals process. Meanwhile, the families of the murdered officers still lack definitive justice and bear the weight of an irreplaceable loss. Dexter Lee Williams, a man who might otherwise have been remembered for his standout high school basketball skills, chose a drastically different path. Hailing from the city of Sparta, in the state of Georgia in the United States, Williams was talented on the court and even played collegiate basketball. However, his life took a dark turn. He traded the spotlight of sports for a life in the shadows, becoming one of the biggest drug lords in central Georgia. In the 1980s, shortly after high school, Dexter began his journey into crime. Over the decades, he built an empire fueled by the trade of illegal substances, gaining a reputation as one of the region's largest distributors. For nearly 5 years, Williams operated quietly, staying under the radar of the authorities. His operation involved a complex distribution network that received shipments directly from the Gulf Cartel in Mexico. The scheme moved more than 40 kilos of illegal substances each month, with plans to double that amount. It is estimated that he earned millions of dollars from these activities, while his merchandise devastated countless lives across the region. Moreover, Williams had no intention of remaining solely in Georgia. He was already planning to expand into the nation's capital, New York, and even Baltimore, seeking an even bigger market for his deals. In March 2020, the tide turned. After a careful investigation that included wiretaps and the monitoring of over 25,000 calls, Dexter was identified as the top leader of a regional criminal organization. Police managed to intercept a shipment of 39 kilos of contraband, valued at nearly $4 million, at a truck stop in Bibb County. The operation was a milestone for local law enforcement, who also arrested more than a dozen suspects tied to Williams's ring. The kingpin himself was apprehended at his home in northern Macon, where his empire came crashing down. The trial of Dexter Lee Williams, held in November 2021, revealed the scope of his crimes. Witnesses, recordings, and messages exposed the inner workings of his criminal network. In one recorded conversation, Williams confidently told an associate that the profit that year would be enormous. He was found guilty of 3 counts under the RICO Act, the Racketeer, Influenced, and Corrupt Organizations statute, along with other crimes connected to drug trafficking. The sentence was direct and severe: 40 years behind bars, a penalty that prosecutors deemed vital to prevent him from returning to a life of crime. In the courtroom, friends and relatives showed another side of Williams. They described him as a community basketball coach who motivated young people. Prosecutors, however, insisted that this public image was a superficial contrast against the havoc wrought by his illegal endeavors. Williams showed no remorse. His ambitions drove him to try expanding his operation further, even at the risk of being caught. The presiding judge emphasized the destructive nature of his actions, declaring him a menace to society. The imprisonment of Dexter Lee Williams symbolizes the fall of one of the most prolific criminals in central Georgia. His case serves as a reminder of the devastating impact drug trafficking can have on entire communities. While he serves his sentence, authorities acknowledge their success but recognize that the struggle to shield society from organized crime carries on. On October 4, 2016, the city of Ann Arbor in Michigan was the scene of a crime that shook the United States. 18-year-old Jordan Klee was found dead on a path near the Pine Lake Village Cooperative on the city's west side. At the time, 17-year-old Dant Wright was identified as the main culprit. He and 2 other young men had plotted to rob the victim, but what was intended to be a simple theft ended in tragedy. Wright admitted that he fired the lethal shot during the attempted robbery. The case drew attention not only because of the crime itself, but also because of Wright's behavior in court, which stunned everyone and nearly altered his fate. During the victim impact hearing on July 24, 2017, Jordan Klee's family members gave emotional statements, sharing the agony of their loss. Klee's mother, Karen, wept as she spoke of her son's shattered dreams and the nights she still hears his screams in nightmares. Meanwhile, Dant Wright was smiling. He shook his head and appeared to scoff at the family's grief. Moreover, in his brief statement, Wright showed no remorse. He merely expressed love for his own family and stated that he would be home soon. This posture, on top of his earlier conduct, reinforced a perception of callousness regarding the seriousness of his actions.
Home soon, R.I.P. Keon, I love my family.
That's all you got to say.
Judge David S. Swartz halted the proceedings to reprimand him. The judge said that he had never rejected a plea deal before but was considering sending the case to trial. He explained that if Wright were found guilty of first-degree murder, he would face life imprisonment with no possibility of parole. The judge's firm tone reflected his anger at Wright's attitude. He observed that the young man showed no sign of regret and treated the moment like a joke, a stance the judge deemed unacceptable given the gravity of the crime and the family's suffering. After the threat to deny the plea deal, the hearing was paused for prosecutors to consult with Klee's family. It was a painful decision, but they chose to proceed with the sentencing agreement rather than draw out the anguish with another trial. They wished to move forward and, despite Wright's behavior, chose to forgive him, opting for a quicker conclusion to the case. Wright's attorney attempted to account for his client's grin, arguing that he was frightened and that his reaction was driven by emotional problems. Some people under extreme stress smile as an almost automatic defense mechanism, the lawyer noted. He apologized on Wright's behalf, stating that the defendant's demeanor did not reflect his actual intentions. At the end of the hearing, Judge Swartz approved the agreement and sentenced Dant Wright to a term of 23 to 50 years in prison for second-degree murder, armed robbery, and conspiracy to commit robbery. Additionally, Wright received 2 more years for firearm possession. The deal mitigated the more severe charges, including first-degree murder, sparing Wright from a life sentence. Other charges, including those potentially linking him to gang activity, were dropped as part of the arrangement. Today, the family of Jordan Klee continues to cope with their loss, while the community debates whether justice was served. To many, Wright's behavior underscores an emotional detachment that both unsettles and enrages society. Deobra Redden, a man with a history of criminal activity, became notorious in the courts of Las Vegas and throughout the world. Before starring in one of the most shocking episodes in local judicial history, he already faced serious charges, including assaults on officers and acts that put people and property at risk. Yet no one could have foreseen what he would do on January 3, 2024. Accused of a string of crimes that included assaults and threats, he arrived at his hearing in the Las Vegas District Court in January of 2024 with a dark past. Among the most recent accusations was that he attacked his then-girlfriend during a heated argument. The case had been widely reported, and prosecutors argued that he posed a danger to society. That morning, Judge Mary Kay Holthus determined that there was no longer any leniency to grant. The sentence was clear: prison. As soon as she announced it, the tension in the courtroom was evident. For those present, the matter was concluded. But for Deobra, that moment was the beginning of a new chapter, one defined by violence and terror. While everyone expected Deobra to accept his sentence, he stunned them all. In just seconds, he lunged at the judge's bench. As if in a film, chaos overwhelmed the courtroom. Deobra broke the physical barrier separating the defendant's area from the bench, grabbing Mary Kay Holthus by her hair and slamming her against a marble wall behind her seat. The judge tried to shield herself, but Deobra's moves were swift and brutal. Witnesses recalled that she cried out for help while he seemed unwilling to let go. Court clerk Michael Lasso acted at that critical moment, rushing in to pull Deobra away. The entire courtroom was in shock. Even the officers took a few precious seconds to react. Lasso, who had been standing next to the judge when the assault began, later described Deobra's intensity as frightening. He tried to restrain the aggressor and even landed a blow in an attempt to save the judge, but it seemed futile. Only the arrival of additional staff and security finally quelled the attack. Days after the assault on January 8, 2024, Deobra Redden returned to court in a far different situation. He was brought in handcuffed, wearing orange gloves that restricted the movement of his hands and a mask designed to prevent biting or spitting, ensuring no one would be harmed that day. The hearing aimed to finalize his sentence for previous crimes and add new charges for the attack on the judge, who was now recognized as a protected victim under state law. The courtroom was filled with officers to thwart any fresh outbreak of violence. During the hearing, Judge Holus, clearly more guarded, spoke about feeling powerless during the attack. Other witnesses, including Clerk Michael Lasso and Officer Shane Brandon, recounted their attempts to subdue Redden. Brandon suffered a deep cut on his face requiring 25 stitches, while Lasso sustained injuries to his hands in the struggle to pull the defendant off the judge. The assault on Holus was no isolated event in Redden's record. Along with an earlier crime involving a baseball bat, he had already faced charges of assault, property damage, and domestic violence in both Nevada and Texas. With 3 felony convictions and 9 misdemeanors, the prosecution portrayed Deobra as violent throughout his adult life. After the attack, Redden was sentenced to 19 to 48 months of solitary confinement under strict supervision, with no contact with other inmates, eating alone, and allowed out of his cell only for very limited periods. According to court documents, following the assault, he claimed the judge had something against him and that he was having a bad day. When Deobra's trial began months later, in September 2024, the courtroom once again filled up. This time, the public wanted to understand how someone could attack a judge in a court of law. Video footage of the incident served as evidence, and Judge Holus took the stand, recalling the event with a combination of sorrow and relief at having survived. She described the overwhelming feeling of helplessness, convinced that the day would be her last. Midway through the trial, Deobra surprised everyone again by switching his defense. He pled guilty but mentally ill, admitting that he intended to take the judge's life. The defense argued that he suffered from schizophrenia and had been unmedicated at the time, but prosecutors maintained that the attack was premeditated. The confession ended the trial, which would pick back up in December 2024, when Deobra would receive his definitive sentence. On December 10, 2024, 31-year-old Deobra Redden listened as the verdict determining his future was delivered. After months of intense legal proceedings and international attention, he was sentenced to a prison term ranging from 26 to 65 years. Considered exemplary, the sentence was handed down by Judge Susan Johnson, who made it clear that Redden's case went beyond his assault on Judge Mary Kay Holthus. It was an offense against the very institution of American justice. Prosecutors also asserted that Redden's attack on Judge Holthus was deliberate. The decision to sentence him to as many as 65 years was widely seen as a response to the severity of the crime and the effect it had on court security. Redden will be eligible for parole only after 2050, making it plain that justice will not give him another chance anytime soon. The long road behind bars will stand as a constant reminder of the day he challenged the justice system and lost. Do not forget to subscribe to watch more videos like this one.